Okay. Uh, the Minifan Top 50 list was discussed on the show today, and I took a lot of notes, and I want to offer some feedback, some advice, some guidance for Blind Mike. Um, Number one thing about guidance and feedback is people should only take your feedback if you have their best interest in mind. And you should only give feedback if you know what someone's goal is. So I'm going to make some assumptions about what Blind Mike's goals are in this process. And I'm going to assume for the sake of this that Mike trusts me enough to at least listen to this and consider the advice that I have for him. When it comes to calculating this advice, I put myself in Blind Mike's shoes. I say, Andy, if Kirk gave you the great honor and blessed you with the responsibility that he has blessed Mike, if he said, Andy, you are the one, you need to lead this meeting in Laconia to come up with the top 50 list. This is my initial kind of brain dump I did of, all right, if I was in charge of that, here's the shit I need to start thinking about. And so it's what I want to ask Mike to think about. That's another assumption I'm making. I'm making the assumption that Mike's not thinking about this stuff, and I could very well be wrong about that. I don't mean to be presumptuous or kind of like talk down to Mike, but from what I know about Mike, having been a fan of the show for 5 years, I don't think Mike has led a group of this size or led a process like this before. He's been in the creative arts. He's self-employed. I don't think he's led a committee of 12 before, let alone a committee of 12, considering such a controversial or potentially spirited topic for discussion and debate. And having some experience facilitating meetings, I can tell you, asking 12 people to agree on a list of 50 items is a big ask. That's a big ask. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm just saying if you told me the person chairing that meeting had no experience doing so, this is the type of stuff I would say, oh, all right, well, here's what they should think about. Here's what I would encourage them to think about. So making that assumption about Mike, that's why I'm offering this advice. I said I'm assuming I know what Mike wants here. Mike said it best today. He said the list is important, and it is important, and it should be treated as such, which means don't treat it like the committee I was on the first time. He has many, some unspeakable, many flaws. One flaw Menners does not have is a lack of care for things in the KMS world, including that list in that committee. Tim and Canton and I, especially Tim, sorry, buddy, could have taken it more seriously. And Gus being Gus, probably not the best skilled person to have led that committee. But overall, we didn't take it seriously enough. This list, this process, and that's the key word I want to underline here for you is process, Mike. This process needs to be respected, which to me would mean a lot of thought and work needs to go into the process before the meeting and the process during the meeting. Now, I know sometimes in the KMS world, right? I said you got to know what people's goals are. Sometimes in the KMS world, the goal is good content. So taking this process seriously, following some of the advice I'm going to give might be at odds at times with the KMS goal of creating good content. If KMS's biggest goal is to have footage from the meeting of fucking chaos and disruption and madness and people screaming at each other and throwing chairs and just a total shit show, if that's the goal, the stuff I have to suggest is not in the best service of that particular goal. What I'm suggesting is in the best interest of compiling this list with integrity, following a good process. It might be boring content, but if the list is important, this is one case where I would say perhaps it is worth sacrificing the chaotic KMS style of content in order to truly put together this list the way it deserves to get put together, because it is important. I understand those two things are at odds. It's kind of like when I was asked to work with Mike and Justin, I struggled with that. I was like, I really think I could help these guys get on the same page. But if they tell me they want it to be on camera and they want it to be good for content, then I'll design it differently, and I'll design it so that there's some things in there that might lead it to be combustible in a way that I would never actually do with a client, right? But this is a case where I'm saying I genuinely feel like if you want to do this, here's the stuff I would tell you to think about. So I said process. The first part of the process to me, Mike, would be the criteria for inclusion on the list. Every time these lists come up, there's all sorts of thoughts and ideas about what the criteria is to land on the list. The closest thing to a consensus so far has been impact, right? So you might think, yeah, it's impact, everybody. Hey, 12 guys, we're going on impact. You got to go deeper there. Define it. What do you mean by impact? You have to have a consensus on that, and it has to be understood ahead of time by everybody when they consider putting together their list. And if not, when they put together their lists, because I'm assuming you're going to have all 12 of them create their own list. If not, then you definitely need that consensus when it comes to the actual meeting in Laconia. People need to know by what criteria these candidates are being judged. So you have to have consensus on that. And I think Kirk needs to be the one to help set that criteria and that understanding. I know Kirk doesn't always like, he's very much a, hey, I gave you the task, go and do it type of guy. But I think in this case, it's his show, it's his list, right? You don't want to put together a top 50 list and then find out Kirk actually would have said, no, you should use a different criteria, right? It should be him setting the criteria for inclusion on the list. So I would first and foremost get, on the show with Kirk and determine that. And also ask him, what is the bigger purpose? Is it to have content that's chaotic, or is it to actually have a smooth and productive process for putting this list together, right? And if you follow all my advice, it doesn't mean you're going to have a tea party at the meeting. Believe me, this meeting likely, you don't really have any maniacs on your committee, so you might have a pretty well-behaved committee, but it's a topic that they really care about. They're going to have strong feelings. They're going to want to hash it out. The meeting will be tense, right? But that doesn't mean it has to be totally out of control. But if Kirk wants to get out of control, you need to know that so you can disregard all my advice here. Your pre-meeting process, I alluded to this. This is the next thing you got to be thinking about now. Let's work backwards. Let's pretend all 12 of your people have sat down in Laconia and you start the meeting. What happens? What gets put in front of them? What document is serving as the foundation for the work that committee needs to do? Now, from the conversations people have had, it seems as though I think your thinking is the 12 people would submit 12 lists, and then somehow those lists would be compiled into a ballot for the final list. Again, I think that sounds simpler than it is. For example, let's say all 12 of them submit their stuff. Here's just two scenarios to consider, right? 12 lists get submitted. One guy has Jimmy, who got Coleman fired, on his list. It's only on one list. It sounds reasonable to say, well, then that name's not going to get put forward. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying that should be understood by those committee members before they put their list together, right? How are those lists going to be compiled into a document that's up for consideration in Laconia? Similarly, let's say it's a case where a name's on a lot of lists. Let's say 9 out of your 12 people have Steve from Gloucester on their list. Okay. Right? That's reasonable. Steve's going to move forward, right? If maybe you say majority, if someone's on a majority of lists, they get put up for consideration. But Steve is on these 9 lists and he's in wildly different spots throughout them. One guy has him 3, one person has him 15, one has him 48, one has him 37. You see what I'm saying? What happens then? How do you determine where on that final list Steve, who was voted for 9 times, winds up? Whatever decision you come to, it's got to be laid out for everybody ahead of time so they can consider these things. The Jimmy guy might say, well, if I'd known that by putting Jimmy forward, if I was the only one, he'd be eliminated. If I'd known that ahead of time, maybe I wouldn't have put that risky name on there. Maybe I would have gone with a name that I thought was more likely to get a few more votes. You hear about this in the Oscars all the time where they say, Sometimes a movie will win because other people said, oh, well, everyone's going to vote for La La Land. So let me vote for whatever the fuck. I know these years don't match, but I'm going to vote for Black Panther because I think it deserves it. And I know La La Land's going to win, so I can throw my vote over to Black Panther. You got to have that type of stuff figured out. Now, I want to say this about AI. I know everyone has said, oh, we'll have an algorithm. Take the 12 list, feed it through, and that'll help us determine the 50, right? Gus tried to do something like that. My general thought is it's kind of like, it's like what Ian Malcolm says in Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so busy wondering if they could, they never stopped to ask if they should. Could AI quickly compile a top 50 list based on the 12 lists submitted? Yes. Should you do it that way? I am not sure. This is a matter of the heart and mind. Again, the list is important. It should be. I struggle with saying, yeah, let AI do that legwork. There's no fucking heart to it. There's no soul to it. I would say keep it personally, my inkling is keep it away from this process. But again, Mike, if you're leading this committee, these are the things you've got to decide. You can decide them with input from the committee, or you can decide it on your own, or you can get their input and then decide on your own. Say, all right, I heard you all, but here's my final call. But whatever. My point is, make these decisions ahead of time and make sure everybody understands, right? I think your general mantra for the planning process should be no surprises. No surprises. Everyone who sits down around that table in Laconia should have an understanding of what process has occurred so far and what process is going to occur in that meeting in order for a final 50 list to be created. Don't take for granted that that's going to be simple. They generally say, right, you asked on the show today, is 12 people too many? Yes. Okay. The general rule of thumb is 10 people, no more than 10. And even 10 is, I would say, like 7's better. But they say that the less controversial the topic, the larger the audience can be. So say you've got a new policy you're rolling out. You can have an audience of 150 people. Who gives a shit? You're just telling them about a policy. As long as they can hear it and you don't need to field questions or anything, pack an auditorium. Who cares? If you're designing that policy, right, and you're trying to do it with input from 150 people, good luck to you. Similarly, 12 people with a topic like this it's a lot of people, which is why I'm emphasizing to you the process. You need to manage it. So how's the meeting going to unfold? What process is going to be followed to come up with that? In terms of the process, Mike, I would love nothing more than to help with that, right? In my spare time, I mean, this book, Facilitation at a Glance, is a great book for anyone who has to run meetings. And I'll just show you, Mike, this book, How to Conduct Productive Meetings, right? Like, this isn't like, these are genuinely my tabs. Like I'm a nerd for this stuff. Like I fucking love this stuff. So all kidding aside, Mike, if I can help you, I would like to. This is the stuff that if you want it to go well, because the list is important, if you want this process to go well, this is the stuff I think you need to consider. You may want to bring in a facilitator to run the meeting with you, help you come up with and again, I could help you with this. You come up with the process with the facilitator's assistance, and then you execute the process in the meeting with the facilitator's assistance. The facilitator would be there to help keep people in line, help keep the process going, help make sure that by 6 or 7 o'clock that evening, whenever the show's going to start, you have a top 50 list that committee can stand by. And ideally for you, Mike, I'm perhaps might as well ask you to touch the moon, but ideally for you, Mike, at the end of this process, everyone on the committee, whether all of their choices ended up on the final list or not, everybody will at least be able to say, Mike ran a fucking finely tuned process and I have no complaints about how things were done. The first committee we can't make that claim. We didn't have a good process. But you have the opportunity to, because the list is important. Kirk also asked today, is Mike allowed to talk about the 50 candidates leading up to it? That's another one where I would say, Mike, if you bring in a facilitator who would have to, part of a facilitator's job is to remain neutral. They can ask questions. They can even make suggestions. That surprises people. Suggestions are not necessarily a breach of neutrality. But by bringing them in and having a facilitator who's going to remain neutral throughout the process, that would enable you to more freely talk about this stuff, because then you're leading, but you're also you're not leading the actual voting process, because you need to have a voice you either need to have a voice or none at all. I don't think you should be wishy-washy and in the middle, and I think you should have a voice. So again, that's another argument for bringing in a facilitator to help take some of those responsibilities off your plate and help avoid any conflict of interest. So the other thing today that got said, you were asked about a member or a potential member, and you said that would be Cullinane's shoulder blades, I believe, which was one of my favorite lines ever on KMS. So yeah, take it seriously, right? And I know it's in KMS. I got called a terrible name by Cullinane once for suggesting that he write things down for the person taking his job after him, which in the real world is a fairly routine thing. And it incensed Cullinane that I suggested that. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm just using that as an example to highlight how fucking different KMS is from the real world oftentimes. So for me to give you all this advice that's based on this, like, the real world stuff, I understand it's contradictory to the spirit of the show and the way things are typically done. But the list is important. Like I said, if the goal is to actually come up with the list with 12 people around the table, 12 opinionated people on a topic that they really care about, asking them to come to a consensus on 50 different things is a tremendous ask. It will require a process. If you don't have the process, you will end up with a fantastic shit show, and that might be your definition of success for this project. But if the emphasis is more on the list and the integrity of the process of developing that list, I behoove you. No, that's not. I implore you, because it would behoove you to listen to what I said in this. All right. Thank you very much, Mike. I'm here. Mike, right? Reach out. I'm here. I would love to help.